Welcome. I am R.K. Young, a member of UUTC and the administrator for this congregation. Whether you're watching live or at your leisure, thank you for being here. Your intention in listening and participating is what makes this time sacred. Whoever you are, we are delighted that you are with us. If you've been wanting to meet some Unitarian Universalists, or frankly, meet anybody, you are invited to attend Fellowship on the Green on Varsity Street on Tuesday between 11:30 and 1:30. Bring a lunch if you like. Masks are required and distancing is practiced. We are saddened by the death of a longtime member of this congregation, David Parker, on Friday. No date or manner for a memorial service has yet been set. Reverend Bob is including David in the prayer later in today's service. Now join us in singing hymn number 12, O Life That Maketh All Things New, with words from Samuel Longfellow. The words will be on your screen.
O life that maketh all things new, the blooming earth, the thoughts within, a pilgrim feet that with thy dew in gladness hither turn again. End to end the greeting flows, from eye to eye the signals run, from heart to heart the bright hope glows, the seekers of the light are one. The freer step, the fuller breath, the wide horizon's grander view, the sense of life that knows no death, the life that maketh all things new.
Our opening words this morning were written by Suzanne Comer Bell, a member of the Transylvania County community. She has woven a complexity. I listened deeply and felt these words belonged here today. You know, I've been thinking, you do have to pay. Taxes, attention, respect. I think I've known this for a long time, maybe my whole life. But what I didn't know was that it would matter in such a critical way now. A critical way. The thing is, we don't want to. In any of these cases, we don't want to pay. Instead, we'd rather hide in a hole of our own demise, because to pay attention means we might have to pay with our lives. And I think we will, in time, pay with our lives. What is it worth to you, to me, to listen with our whole heart? To listen with our wisdom instead of listening with the intention to avoid the real truth? I wonder about this now as I awaken to some hard news, and I wonder how we handle such news. The deaths of so much dreaming comes in a matter of moments, a matter of days, and we go on breathing and keeping rhythm with old times, old ways, when it is something new that awaits. Something our scriptures say we believe, but do we? Do we believe in the light of the living love lingering now, listening and letting us go into a kind of eternity we could only dream of yesterday? But today, Well, today is something new. Pay attention. You have to pay. Never mind. I knew you wouldn't hang in this long, and I know now I have to let this go. Let you go. To light our chalice this morning, I have a reading from Nancy Reed McKee, Our Community Knows No Boundaries. Our community knows no boundaries. We are not confined by the physical limits of walls, or, for that matter, of what often binds us, restricts us, or holds us back. We are freer than we know when we release ourselves and each other from expectations of what is needed for true community. We are here together in space. I see you. I hear you. I love you. And I light this chalice, a beacon of this community, holding us all together here, now. Today, we light candles for all those who have experienced devastating loss. May this light, kindled by all our hearts, bring comfort. Today, we light candles for all those who cannot choose to not be present on our front lines, in healthcare, in civic responsibility, in taking care of children. May this light, kindled by all our hearts, bring honor. Today, we light candles for all those able to feel the joy of fall or fresh air to breathe, of clean water to drink and otherwise enjoy, may this light, kindled by all our hearts, bring courage. And finally, we light candles for any care or any hope that you hold in your heart. May this light, kindled by all our hearts, be a torch you can carry forward.
Winds be still, storm clouds pass and silence come. Peace grace this time with harmony. Fly, bird of hope, and shine, light of love, and in calm let all find tranquility. Bird, fly high, lift our gaze toward distant view, help us to sense life's mystery. Fly high and far, and lead us each to see how we move through the winds of eternity. Light shine in, illuminate our inward view, help us to see with clarity. Shine bright and true, so we may join our songs in new sounds that become full symphony.
I very much appreciate the musical offerings of this congregation. As we have had our chance to reflect during the music, let us enter into a brief time of prayer. I invite you to take a deep breath, center yourself, adjust your body, your feet to be grounded into this moment of prayer and meditation. Spirit of love and life, we who are gathered in this time of worship reach out in sorrow with the loss of David Parker among our members here. Let us remember that we are a community of love and caring and support. As we look to Trisha's grief and for all of us who have felt a connection. Let's remember as well the many griefs and losses that each of us have felt over this year. May we keep in our prayers as well those things that are of unrest. Let us not be distracted by our own election season and forgetting the many pains of this world. The unrest in Armenia and Azerbaijan and the hope for peace. The unrest in Nigeria. The unrest in many places in the world right now. Our hearts go out to those who are suffering. Our hope and love goes out with the idea that maybe we will enter into a time of peace. These and the prayers of our hearts and our thoughts, we hold and we say, Amen. The reading that I've chosen for this morning is from Matthew 13, which starts with the parable of the sower, the crowds gathering round, and then Jesus telling the story, and the various seeds that are thrown to the ground. And it ends in the first section, verse 9, let anyone with ears listen. And then, as seems always happens, the disciples come up with questions. I'll read a paraphrase translation here, starting at line 10. Then the disciples approached Jesus and asked, why do you always speak to people in these hard to understand parables? Jesus explained, you've been given a lot of close experience and insight into hidden truths and mysteries, but they haven't. For everyone who listens with an open heart will receive progressively more revelation until that person has more than enough. But those who don't listen with an open, teachable heart, even the understanding that they think they have will be taken from them. That's why I teach the people using parables, because they think they're looking for truth, yet because their hearts are unteachable, they never discover it. Although they'll listen to me, they never fully perceive the message I speak. The prophecy of Isaiah describes this perfectly. Although they listen carefully to everything spoken, they don't understand a thing said. They might pretend, but the eyes of their hearts are closed. Their minds are dull and slow to perceive. Their ears are plugged, and so they're hard of hearing. And they've deliberately shut themselves off from the truth. Otherwise, they would open their eyes to see, and open their ears to hear, and open their minds to understand. Then they would turn to me and let me instantly heal them. But disciples, your eyes are privileged, for you've learned to see. Welcome to this final sermon on our topic of deep listening. I've come to this sermon now reinvigorated somewhat by the discussions that I had among the Soul Matters discussion that was held in a hybrid way. We had it last weekend outside in the meditation circle, and then also broadcast over Zoom, so that the folks who have the packet and the various questions in the packet could have a chance to talk, explore, wonder at the various ways in which we come at this topic. And so I, as minister, thank out loud Susan and Sue and Dawn and Joanna and Jim and Nancy and Susan and Dave and David and Tricia and Vanessa and Edie. For what I bring to you is not just from my own thinking, but an amalgam of some of the wisdom that was spoken around that circle. If you have not yet emailed me to ask to be on the list of people who receive the packet each month, please do so soon. I'll be sending out the November packet as we reach next Sunday. And we'll announce on that channel as well exactly when the discussions will be held. Most likely because of the turn of the weather and COVID, just over Zoom next time. I love the way in which we have shared meaning as we talk. That others provide a feedback to our own thought. A way of going deeper to clarify questions and the answers. Some of the questions that we covered included some tough ones. Have you forgiven yourself for failing to listen? An important part in which we might share stories from our lives of the times in which we failed sometime to listen. Most often when that happens, we need to find the chance to apologize. More importantly was when we skipped to number 6 on the list, which said, instead of arguing with them, what if the next time you ask, will you tell me your story? I'd love to know how you came to this point of view. It was pointed out that those of us who attended the workshop online for the braver angels, to understand how we bridge the gap between red and blue and discussing political things, something that's very needed during these weeks now and probably for many months to come. For no matter what we do with an election, we're still left with people who have disagreements and different perspectives on things. To ask that question, instead of arguing with them, what if the next time we asked, will you tell me your story? The reading this morning from Jesus was saying the way that Jesus could get through to people. And he kind of buttered up the disciples saying, you're special. But he told all the disciples stories as well. And almost every time the disciples came back and said, Jesus, we don't understand this. The idea is, if you get to a story, you can begin to listen with your heart. If you ask someone their story, they can let the words and arguments get out of the way, and they can reveal something true of themselves. For even if you disagree, you might find that you love them a little closer. You see something of their inherent worth and dignity in the way in which their life comes through in narration. I always appreciated that of my parents. Well, always. There were some years in which I didn't want to hear their stories. That was a long time ago. That's not the life I'm living. But I find that oftentimes to be able to recall a story or two of what my parents said to me or to my children of their life, I began to learn more about the person and what made up the person. You'd think that we'd all know our parents, our siblings, our next door neighbor, somebody that we'd been rubbing elbows with for a long time. But you know what? It's not just for the transmission of holy words, but it's for us to begin to wrestle with who are we and how are we in relationship to a story. I've enjoyed so much to asking people's story. How did you get here to UUTC? Or tell me about all the years you've been here. Tell me your story. I can't understand a way in which during this time we must be suffering without the stories of one another. It's something that I know I'm asked. If you have come to Fellowship on the Green or a Zoom meeting and social time and asked a question, tell me, Bob, about you. I've been able to share something and I've been able to listen to others. I don't think that this question is here to ask how can we set up arguments among congregants in this congregation. It's how can we find more spaces to hear the story? It's interesting, as I've said before, Kevin matches up a children's story to go with the theme. And I think the narration for children's stories fits exactly what holy words of leaders have figured out. If you can't get it into a story, then maybe you can't get it into someone's listening. You can't get it straight to their heart. That was followed by a very apt question. What if listening is actually an act of love? I raise this time and again because the presentation of ourselves in front of another person with our ears open, with our reactivity set on low and our listening set on high, that we ask only clarifying questions to allow others to be themselves, to reflect back to one another what we hear from one another. This is deep, loving learning. One of the participants in Soul Matters emailed a clarification of a quote, and I'm going to read it here. Reflecting on the deep listening Soul Matters package, what if listening is actually an act of love? The participant said, I've always liked the saying that life is a school and love is the lesson. Life is the school. Love is the lesson. And then in the circle, an addition came forward. Everything is my teacher, and I'm always a student. Am I listening? This is not just a question of what if listening is an act of love to others, but what if it is also an act of love to ourselves? As I have said before, that if we have learned the story of another and taken it to heart, might we then have some glimpse of some new teaching, some new beauty, some maybe poetry in what we hear and see. The gift to ourselves, then, is the way in which we present ourselves to be taught. Now, I know the noise of the world gets in the way of doing that. I spent a wonderful time with friends when I was back in Pennsylvania, and we sat and we chatted about our lives, our children's lives, the things that were going on in the community around us, the projects that we were working on as labors of love in our yards, our gardens, and in any home improvements or whatever other things we were doing. And then we turned to the noise of the world, I felt. The whole piece of what the debates were going to be about, or what were the election results going to be. I'm not sure that that was helpful in our feeling of connection with one another, although I think it let out some of the steam and anxiety and all our jitteriness. I don't think all of my friends think the same way I do, but I do think that we can talk about things. I was pleased when someone passed along the link to the Utah governor's race tweet that came out this past week. Something of a message of unity, where they had a Democratic and Republican candidate standing there. It reminded me a little bit of the stance that I'm Mac and I'm PC, two persons standing with a white background and just having their words. And the two came to the point of saying that they decided they could stand together and say, when the election occurs, we can set a standard. We can work towards unity. We can join together. They both ended by saying, we approve this message. It was so different from all the other commercials I've been seeing. And if you haven't seen it, please go online and do a web check on that, the Utah governor's tweet, Utah governor's race, whatever it may be. A reminder that people can talk as if The noise of the world need not be what we've been handed. I loved our conversations as they went into another question. If you are struggling with that old voice in your head that says you are meant to be seen, not heard, how many individuals have been given a message once, twice, however many times, that somehow just sit there, just be quiet. Please don't speak up. I said out loud that message did not sink in with me. I know that there are situations in which I am not the expert. I'm not the person who needs to speak, and I have said that in the earlier sermons in this sequence. I am the person, in fact, you pay to be right here and speak. But if we are going to receive in love the gifts of others, we also must be able to give in love. The idea that we are here to say our gentle messages, our protest messages, our messages of love and hope, our messages with a perspective not yet heard, and our story. By saying those things, by overcoming the struggle with whoever taught us to please just sit down and be quiet, it's not polite or whatever was spread over us in some way to make us less uppity, less participatory. To throw that off and learn once again, there is something in our sharing that is absolutely necessary. For in the deep listening, we must have the deep sharing. Finally, I bring up the question of evil. When we in our conversations were asked the question, what if your boredom is really your inner voice warning you that something is wrong? I come to a point in which I remember how I was charged as a minister in one of the congregations where I arrived to serve. The person giving the charge said, Unitarian Universalists haven't been historically, at least in the past 50 years, haven't been so good about talking about evil. It's always about the good things and how we strive for the good things. I had an experience, though, once. It's something along the lines of learning that my body might give me signals when I'm hearing something that says, this is not right. This is not where you should be engaged. The question is about boredom, but I was literally yawning as an individual was speaking to me. Now, please, congregants, if I ever yawn in front of you, it's not because I'm bored with what you're saying. It's because I didn't get enough sleep. But in this case, the person talking to me, it turned out, was spinning a story of lies with no connection and no real narrative. The person was deliberately not letting me in. That's rather interesting, but not too unusual. I'm sure those of you who are therapists or teachers or supervisors at work know that you're not getting the full story. There's something not being said. And you have to tune into a message and say, that's wrong. There's something wrong going on here. As it turned out, the individual who was obfuscating ended up hiding something that later came out with that person's arrest. They weren't telling their real story, though they had a minister right in front of them. They weren't telling their real story. And it wasn't until they were arrested that the real story of what was going on in their life came out. I am rather reluctant to label things as evil, but some of the things that were being done, I think, could fall into that range. What kind of reaction do you have as you hear somebody's story? Is it the noise of your own heart recognizing something in this is wrong? In which case, do you need to step away? Have your boundaries been broken in the past in the ways in which this is not a loving thing to stay in conversation? This is harmful. Does your heart, your brain, your subconscious scream out and say, not here, not this person, not this story? Do you close out your time in that space and take care and ask yourself, what was that reaction in my heart? I won't share the stories of the people in the circle. You will have to ask one another. Show up for, circles on Zoom, whatever we may do in which we allow ourselves the discourse that we share, the wounded times, the bored times. And perhaps I can switch to a bit of levity, as I heard that therapists may ask the question, am I really interested with this new patient? One therapist said, if you're not interested in what you're hearing, you're of no use to that client, and you should just ask the client to find another therapist. That was an interesting piece too. If we are here with saying, will you tell me your story, and we find we're not interested, might we encourage somebody to find another ear to listen to? I would like, when we come back together, to think of the ways in which each of us might go through the coffee hour, go through our gatherings, seeking out new people whose stories we haven't heard. In closing, I would like to say, a congregation I served was graced with someone who had trouble functioning in groups, who desperately wanted connection, who desperately wanted their story heard. And it ended up that that person was the best deep listener to each new visitor to that congregation, because they sought out all the new people who hadn't heard their own story, so that every coffee hour they could share their story with someone new. They were the most effective diplomat to new people, while all the others closed their circles in close listening to only their friends. This person desperately sought out anyone who hadn't listened before. May we be loving in our listening. May we be open with our hearts to hear others' stories, that we might hear something of the divine. May we be open to the signals that we receive when the listening isn't quite right, and our boundaries need to be very carefully fenced. May we, as we go through our lives listening, do it without the cacophony of the world guiding us into conversation. And instead, may we be more like Jesus and figure out that the best way to connect with another and to connect our message to another is through story and listening to the other's story. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to this final deep listening subject. It's at this point in the service that I remind you that all religions ask people to bring the best of themselves, to sacrifice something of their best time, talent, and treasure. I ask you to think of the ways in which you might be giving. Have you checked to see how up to date you are with your pledge? Have you considered how you might volunteer this week, here or elsewhere, for the good of what you believe in? Everything that you give goes out there into this world and makes our impact even better. What you give with love, we receive with great joy, and we say, thank you. I invite you to sing with me our next hymn. The words will be printed on your screen.
Sing out praises for the journey, pilgrims we who carry on, searchers in the soul's deep yearnings, like God forbears in their time. We seek out the Spirit's wholeness in the endless human quest. Look inside your souls, the kindling of the heart fire pilgrims new. Find the Spirit always restless, find it in each mind and heart. Touch and hold that ancient yearning, kindling for a new-found truth. Stand we now upon the threshold, facing futures yet unknown. Hearth behind us, wayside hostel, built by those who knew wild roads. God, we ere their sacred embers, carried in our minds and hearts.
To close out our service, we look to the chalice, a symbol of Unitarian Universalism, glowing across congregations across this nation and scattered in other places in the globe, wherever Unitarian Universalists are gathering. Let's remember as we extinguish this flame the words that helped bring it into kindling, the values which help its glowing light and warmth guide us in how we go about listening to others and speaking into the circles that we inhabit. Let us carry this now through this week. And I extinguish the helper candle as well, in remembering that all of us have had helpers who have helped us find our way to lighting our own beacons. Let us remember and recognize those helpers among us through this week. And may we come back to this service again, this congregation online, with love and connection next week.